I agreed to marry the Alpha King on a Thursday morning, and by sunset, people were already calling me a hero. They had no idea I felt more like a sacrifice. Evelyn Carter stood at the edge of the council chamber, her fingers curled tightly around the folded document that would change the course of her life. Beyond the tall windows of the White Pine Capitol, storm clouds gathered over the distant mountains, turning the late afternoon sky a deep shade of gray. The city below was restless. Merchants packed their stalls early. Families hurried home. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same fear: war. For nearly 2 years, tension had grown between the Eastern Territories and the Northern Kingdom. Trade routes had collapsed. Borders had tightened. Rumors spread faster than truth. One wrong decision now could ignite a conflict that would touch every pack across the continent. Evelyn knew that better than anyone. Her older brother had spent his final months stationed along the disputed border. He had left home promising to return before winter. He never did. Ever since then, one name had lived in her thoughts like a shadow she could never escape: Damon Blackthorne, Alpha King of the North, the man newspapers called brilliant, the man soldiers called unstoppable, the man Evelyn blamed for everything. The council doors opened behind her. Elder Whitmore stepped into the hallway with a tired expression. His silver hair seemed even whiter than it had that morning. "They're waiting for your answer," he said softly. Evelyn laughed once, though there was no humor in it. "As if I have a choice." The old man didn't argue, because they both knew she was right. The proposal had arrived 3 days earlier under royal seal. Not a threat, not a demand, an offer. A political marriage between Evelyn Carter, daughter of one of the oldest families in the East, and Damon Blackthorne himself. If accepted, both kingdoms would sign a permanent peace accord. Military mobilizations would end. Border disputes would be settled. Thousands of lives would be spared. If rejected, nobody could predict what would happen next. Evelyn looked down at the document in her hands. The ink seemed darker than before, heavier somehow. She had imagined many futures for herself. None of them included standing beside the man she had publicly criticized for years. None of them included becoming his queen. "You can still walk away," Elder Whitmore said. Evelyn stared through the window. Far below, children crossed the town square carrying baskets of bread. A young couple laughed near a fountain. Life continued because people believed tomorrow would come. She wondered how many of them understood how fragile peace really was. "If I walk away," she whispered, "someone else's son won't come home. Someone else's sister will spend years waiting for answers she'll never get." The elder lowered his eyes. Silence settled between them. Finally, Evelyn unfolded the document and signed her name. The moment the pen left the paper, something shifted inside her. Not relief, not certainty, just the realization that there was no turning back. Hours later, as dusk painted the horizon gold and amber, a royal messenger arrived with the official response from the north. Evelyn broke the seal with steady hands. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. Not from an advisor, not from a council member, from Damon Blackthorne himself. "Welcome to the beginning of peace." Evelyn read the line twice, then a third time, and for reasons she couldn't explain, it unsettled her more than any threat ever could. Because for the first time, she wondered if the man she hated was not the man she thought she knew. The journey north began before sunrise. Evelyn Carter sat beside the carriage window and watched her homeland disappear 1 mile at a time. Frost covered the fields like silver dust, and the bare branches of winter trees stretched across the landscape beneath a pale morning sky. Every turn of the road carried her farther from everything familiar. She had expected to feel fear. Instead, she felt strangely numb. 3 days had passed since she signed the agreement. 3 days of ceremonies, meetings, and endless discussions about peace. Yet nobody had asked how she felt about leaving her life behind. To the council, she was no longer simply Evelyn. She had become a symbol, a bridge between kingdoms, a solution. The thought left a bitter taste in her mouth. By midday, the royal escort entered Northern Territory. The difference was immediate. The roads were wider. The villages appeared prosperous. Stone watchtowers rose from distant hills, their banners moving gently in the cold breeze. Nothing looked like the ruthless kingdom she had spent years imagining. That unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Late that afternoon, the convoy reached Blackthorn Keep. The fortress stood atop a cliff overlooking a frozen river, its dark stone walls catching the fading sunlight. It was enormous without being extravagant, powerful without needing to prove it. As the carriage rolled through the gates, hundreds of people lined the main courtyard. Workers, guards, merchants, families. None of them looked afraid. None of them looked oppressed. They simply looked curious. Evelyn stepped down from the carriage, lifting her chin despite the knot forming in her stomach. The crowd fell silent. For a moment she felt every eye in the kingdom resting on her shoulders. Then she noticed someone standing at the far end of the courtyard. Damon Blackthorn. The first thing she noticed was not his height or his reputation. It was his stillness. While everyone else shifted or whispered, he remained perfectly calm. His dark coat moved slightly in the wind, but otherwise he looked carved from stone. His silver eyes met hers across the distance. Neither smiled. Neither looked away. The silence stretched for several seconds before Damon finally stepped forward. "Lady Carter," he said. His voice was lower than she expected. Calm. Controlled. "Welcome to Blackthorn Keep." Evelyn had prepared dozens of responses during the journey. Sharp responses. Cold responses. Yet standing there, she found herself strangely disappointed that he did not match the villain she had built in her mind. "Thank you for the invitation," she replied carefully. A faint expression crossed his face. Not amusement exactly. More like understanding. "I suspect invitation is not the word you would choose." Several nearby officials shifted nervously. Evelyn almost smiled despite herself. Almost. Before she could answer, a voice spoke from behind her. "Do not trust anyone who benefits from peace." She turned immediately. The crowd remained where it was. Faces blurred together. No one seemed out of place. No one seemed responsible. "Did you hear that?" she asked. Damon studied her expression. "Hear what?" Evelyn scanned the courtyard again. Nothing. The voice had vanished as quickly as it appeared. A chill traveled down her spine that had nothing to do with winter. Damon watched her carefully but did not press for an explanation. Instead, he extended a hand toward the entrance of the keep. "There is much we need to discuss." Evelyn hesitated for only a moment before walking beside him. Behind them, the massive gates slowly closed. Somewhere among the crowd, hidden behind polite smiles and hopeful speeches, someone had wanted her to hear that warning. And for the first time since agreeing to the marriage, Evelyn felt something more dangerous than fear. She felt the unmistakable sense that a much larger game had already begun. The warning followed Evelyn Carter long after the courtyard had disappeared behind her. As she walked through the vast halls of Blackthorn Keep, she found herself studying every face they passed. Advisors bowed politely. Servants offered warm smiles. Guards stood at attention. Yet the voice lingered in her mind with unsettling clarity. "Do not trust anyone who benefits from peace." The words made no sense. Peace would help everyone, would it not? That was the entire reason she had agreed to this marriage. Damon Blackthorn led her through a series of corridors lined with tall windows overlooking the frozen river below. The late afternoon sun reflected off the ice, casting silver light across the stone floors. Eventually they arrived at a private meeting room overlooking the Western Valley. Maps covered one wall. Shelves filled with records and reports lined another. It looked less like a king's chamber and more like a place where difficult decisions were made. Damon stopped beside a large table. "You are free to ask any question you wish," he said. Evelyn folded her arms. "That is dangerous." To her surprise, he nodded. "Probably." For a moment neither spoke. Then Evelyn glanced toward the maps. Colored markers stretched across dozens of locations. Trade routes, villages, supply centers, border crossings. She frowned. "These are civilian routes." Damon followed her gaze. "Yes. I expected military positions. The military reports are elsewhere." Evelyn looked back at him. "Why focus on these?" Damon answered without hesitation. "Because wars are easier to start when leaders forget who pays the price." The response caught her off guard. It sounded nothing like the speeches she had spent years criticizing. Before she could challenge him, a knock interrupted them. An older advisor entered carrying several folders. "Your Majesty, the Southern negotiations have concluded." Damon accepted the documents. The advisor bowed and left. As the door closed, a folded envelope slipped from the stack and landed near Evelyn's side of the table. Damon did not notice. Curious, she reached down and picked it up. There was no seal. No official marking. Only her name written across the front. Evelyn Carter. Her pulse quickened. "What is it?" Damon asked. "I do not know." She carefully unfolded the paper inside. The handwriting was familiar enough to steal the air from her lungs. For one impossible second, she thought she was looking at her brother's writing. Her eyes raced across the page. The message was short. "If you are reading this, then someone finally decided you deserved the truth. Trust no one who profits from old hatred." The paper slipped slightly in her hands. Damon stepped closer, concern replacing his usual calm expression. "Evelyn." She stared at the words again. The writing looked exactly like the letters her brother had sent home from the border. The same slant, the same careful spacing, the same unmistakable style. Yet that could not be possible. He had been gone for nearly 2 years. Slowly, she looked toward the window where the first evening stars were beginning to appear above the valley. Somewhere inside Blackthorn Keep, someone knew things they should not know. Someone had access to her past. And for the first time since arriving in the north, Evelyn realized that the secrets waiting inside these walls might be far more dangerous than the king himself. The letter remained hidden inside Evelyn's room that night, tucked beneath a stack of books where nobody would think to look. Sleep never came. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the familiar handwriting again. By dawn, she had reached only one conclusion. Someone wanted her to find the message. The question was why. The next morning, snow drifted quietly across the castle grounds as she made her way through the eastern wing of Blackthorn Keep. Servants moved through the halls carrying trays of breakfast and bundles of fresh linens. Everything appeared normal. Yet Evelyn could not shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching every step she took. Near midday, she found herself standing outside the royal archives. The heavy oak door stood partially open. Inside, rows of shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with records spanning generations. She hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. If answers existed, they would be here. Hours passed as she searched through military reports, border agreements, and council correspondence. Dust covered her fingertips. Her eyes ached from reading. Still she continued. Then she found a file bearing the date of her brother's final deployment. Her pulse quickened. Carefully she opened it. The report detailed troop movements, supply requests, and diplomatic communications from the months leading up to the border crisis. She expected to find evidence connecting Damon Blackthorn to the tragedy she had blamed him for. Instead, she found something entirely different. Several letters carried the Alpha King's personal authorization. Again and again, Damon had ordered negotiations. Again and again, he had requested additional talks between the two territories. One document stopped her cold. It was a proposal for a ceasefire submitted only days before the incident that changed everything. Evelyn read the page twice, then a third time. The date was unmistakable. The signature was authentic. If this record was genuine, Damon had been trying to prevent escalation while others pushed for confrontation. A quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. "You found something. Interesting." Evelyn turned sharply. Damon stood in the doorway. Snowflakes melted on the shoulders of his dark coat. For a moment neither spoke. Then she lifted the document. Why was this hidden? His expression remained calm. It was not hidden. Most people simply never asked to see it. She studied his face, searching for deception. Instead she found only exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion. The deeper kind carried by people who had spent too many years fighting the same battle. "These orders contradict everything I was told," she said quietly. Damon stepped farther into the archive. Many stories survive because they are useful, not because they are true. The words lingered between them. Evelyn looked back down at the documents spread across the table. For years she had built her hatred around certainty. Around the belief that she understood exactly who Damon Blackthorn was. Now small cracks were appearing in that certainty. Cracks large enough for doubt to slip through. As she gathered the papers, something else caught her eye. Tucked between two reports was a folded note written in the same handwriting as the mysterious letter. Her breath caught. Slowly she opened it. Only one sentence appeared on the page. Ask who benefited when peace failed. Beneath the message was a symbol she had never seen before. And for the first time, Evelyn realized that the truth she was chasing might lead far beyond the walls of Blackthorn Keep. The symbol on the note stayed in Evelyn's thoughts for the next 2 days. She sketched it repeatedly in the margins of a journal, hoping familiarity would reveal its meaning. Nothing did. Meanwhile, preparations for the official peace ceremony continued throughout Blackthorn Keep. Delegates arrived from neighboring territories. Advisors moved through the halls carrying stacks of documents. Every conversation seemed centered on the future. Yet Evelyn could not stop looking into the past. On the morning of the third day, she wandered into the castle gardens. Winter had stripped most of the color from the landscape, but rows of evergreen trees still stood proudly beneath a clear blue sky. A frozen fountain occupied the center of the courtyard, its surface glittering beneath sunlight. For the first time since arriving, she felt almost peaceful. Then she noticed 2 men speaking near a stone archway. The moment they saw her, their conversation stopped. One of them quickly folded a paper and slipped it inside his coat. The exchange lasted only seconds, but something about it felt wrong. Evelyn continued walking as if she had not noticed. When she glanced back moments later, both men were gone. That evening, a formal dinner brought dozens of important guests together inside the great hall. Crystal chandeliers filled the room with warm light. Music drifted softly through the air. At first glance it looked like a celebration. Yet Evelyn sensed tension beneath the smiles. Several guests watched Damon closely. Others seemed more interested in the political agreements than the people signing them. During the meal, she found herself studying the room instead of eating. That was when she saw it. The symbol. Tiny and nearly hidden. Engraved on a silver ring worn by one of the visiting delegates. Her heartbeat quickened. The same symbol from the note. The same symbol connected somehow to the mystery surrounding her brother. Before she could get a better look, the delegate stood and disappeared into the crowd. Evelyn rose immediately. She followed at a careful distance through a series of corridors leading away from the banquet hall. The man moved quickly, checking over his shoulder more than once. Eventually he entered a quiet wing of the castle rarely used by guests. Evelyn slowed her pace. Voices echoed from a room ahead. She could not hear every word, only fragments. Peace agreement. Delays. Risk. Then one sentence reached her clearly. If the marriage succeeds, everything we built falls apart. Evelyn froze. Her breath caught. Someone inside that room did not want peace. Someone feared the alliance she and Damon represented. A floorboard creaked beneath her foot. Instantly the voices stopped. Silence filled the corridor. The door opened. Evelyn turned away just in time, pretending to examine a nearby painting. Footsteps approached. Before panic could take hold, another figure appeared from the opposite direction. Damon. His arrival caused the others to retreat without a word. Once they disappeared around the corner, he looked at her carefully. You should not be wandering these halls alone tonight, he said quietly. Evelyn hesitated. Then she asked the question that had been growing inside her for days. Damon, who loses if peace actually happens? For the first time since she met him, something darkened behind his silver eyes. Not anger. Recognition. As if he already knew the answer and wished he did not. And in that moment, Evelyn realized the danger surrounding them was no longer hidden in the past. It was already moving through the castle walls. That night, long after the castle had fallen quiet, Evelyn stood alone on a balcony overlooking the frozen river. The wind carried the scent of snow across the valley, and thousands of lights shimmered below from villages scattered throughout the kingdom. Somewhere beyond those distant hills, families were sleeping peacefully because they believed peace was finally within reach. Yet inside Blackthorn Keep, uncertainty seemed to grow with every passing day. The question she had asked Damon earlier continued to echo in her thoughts. Who loses if peace actually happens? She did not hear the balcony door open behind her. Most people assume war creates enemies, Damon said quietly. Sometimes peace does too. Evelyn turned toward him. Moonlight silvered the edges of his dark coat. For once, He looked less like a king and more like a man carrying a burden he could never fully set down. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Evelyn stepped closer. "You knew exactly what I meant." Damon rested his hands on the stone railing. His gaze remained fixed on the valley below. "There are powerful people on both sides of the border whose influence depends on conflict. Contracts, trade monopolies, political leverage. Fear can be very profitable." Evelyn thought about the delegates, the secret meeting, and the symbol she had seen on the silver ring. Suddenly the pieces felt connected. Not complete but connected. "And the people behind that symbol?" she asked. Damon looked at her. Surprise flickered briefly across his expression. "You have seen it." It was not a question. Evelyn nodded. For the first time, genuine concern appeared in his eyes. "Then you need to be careful." The warning unsettled her. Not because of what he said but because of how he said it. There was no manipulation in his voice. No strategy. Only sincerity. Before she could respond, movement below caught her attention. Several riders entered the castle grounds through the southern gate. Their arrival seemed ordinary at first. Then she noticed the urgency among the guards escorting them. Damon followed her gaze. His expression hardened immediately. Without another word, he turned toward the door. Evelyn followed him through a maze of corridors until they reached a private receiving chamber. An elderly messenger stood waiting beside the fireplace. Snow covered his travel cloak. His face looked pale with exhaustion. The man handed Damon a sealed packet. Silence filled the room as Damon read the contents. Evelyn watched carefully. Whatever was written there drained the color from his face. Slowly he folded the paper. "What happened?" she asked. Damon hesitated. Then he handed her the document. Her eyes scanned the page. The report described a series of anonymous letters appearing across both territories. Letters filled with false claims, false accusations, rumors designed to reignite distrust between the kingdoms. At the bottom of the report was a detail that made her stomach tighten. Several letters had been signed using the same symbol she had seen on the ring. The same symbol hidden inside the note she had received. Evelyn looked up. "They are not hiding anymore." Damon nodded once. The fire crackled softly behind them. Outside, the wind pressed against the castle windows. For the first time, both of them were staring at the same enemy. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the safety of the keep, someone had just made their next move. The following morning arrived beneath a sky the color of steel. Snow drifted across the castle towers while workers hurried through the courtyard, preparing for the official peace summit scheduled only days away. From her window, Evelyn watched the kingdom awaken. Normally the sight would have brought comfort. Today it only reminded her how much was at stake. The anonymous letters had already begun spreading beyond the borders. Rumors traveled quickly. Trust did not. After breakfast, Damon invited her to join a meeting with several regional governors. Evelyn expected another discussion about trade agreements and border policy. Instead, she found herself watching Damon navigate a room full of competing interests, personal agendas, and old grievances. He listened more than he spoke. When disagreements surfaced, he never raised his voice. He simply asked questions until people found common ground on their own. It was not the behavior of the ruthless ruler she had spent years imagining. Hours later, after the meeting ended, they walked together through a quiet corridor overlooking the western cliffs. For a while neither spoke. Then Damon glanced toward her. "You have been studying me." The observation caught her off guard. "And you have been studying me," she replied. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough." The moment felt strangely easy. Unexpectedly easy. Evelyn found herself relaxing despite everything happening around them. That realization unsettled her more than she cared to admit. They eventually reached a small library tucked away in one of the oldest sections of the keep. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. A fire burned quietly in the stone hearth. Damon crossed the room and removed a weathered journal from a shelf. "There is something I want you to see." He handed it to her. The journal belonged to his grandfather, a former Alpha King who had spent decades pursuing diplomatic relationships with neighboring territories. As Evelyn turned the pages, she discovered entries describing meetings with leaders from her own homeland, shared harvest festivals, cooperative rebuilding projects, Family friendships that had existed long before the conflict began. We were never supposed to become enemies, Damon said quietly. Evelyn looked up from the journal. The sadness in his voice felt genuine. Not political. Personal. For a long moment neither looked away. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. Felt familiar. Safe. Then Evelyn noticed a folded paper tucked near the back of the journal. Curious, she opened it. Her breath caught instantly. It was a photograph. Faded with age but still recognizable. Two young men stood beside a riverbank, smiling at the camera. One was Damon, years younger than she had ever seen him. The other was her brother. Evelyn stared at the image in disbelief. This cannot be real. Damon stepped closer. It is. Her heart pounded. You knew him. Damon nodded slowly. Better than you realize. The room suddenly felt smaller. Every assumption she had carried for years seemed to shift beneath her feet. The man she blamed for her brother's loss had once stood beside him as a friend. As Evelyn looked at the photograph again, one question rose above all the others. If Damon had known her brother personally, then what really happened all those years ago? For a long time, Evelyn could not take her eyes off the photograph. The image had frozen a moment she never knew existed. Her brother stood beside Damon on the riverbank, both of them younger, both smiling with the easy confidence of people who trusted each other completely. Felt impossible. Everything she believed about the past seemed to unravel with every passing second. Why did he never tell me? She asked quietly. Damon remained silent for a moment before answering. Because he was trying to protect something. Evelyn looked up sharply. Protect what? Damon walked toward the window overlooking the snowy cliffs. The fading afternoon sun painted the valley in shades of gold and silver. Peace. The word landed heavily between them. Evelyn rose from her chair. You expect me to believe that? Damon turned back toward her. I expect you to decide for yourself. Then he crossed the room and opened a locked drawer inside an old desk. From it he removed a worn leather folder. Carefully, he placed it on the table between them. Your brother gave this to me 3 weeks before everything fell apart. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside were maps, reports, and handwritten notes. Most were ordinary diplomatic documents. Then she found a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her brother's. She immediately recognized the careful strokes of every word. Her breath caught as she began reading. The letter described growing concern about a hidden network operating across both territories. Influential individuals who benefited whenever tensions increased. People who quietly sabotaged negotiations while publicly supporting unity. Several names had been redacted, but one detail stood out. Next to a rough sketch of the mysterious symbol was a short note written in the margin. They are closer than anyone realizes. Evelyn stared at the words. They matched everything she had discovered since arriving at Blackthorn Keep. The anonymous messages. The secret meetings. The delegates wearing the symbol. Her brother had known about all of it. Damon stepped closer. He believed we could expose them together. Evelyn lowered the letter. What happened? A shadow crossed Damon's face. We got close. His voice remained calm, but she sensed years of regret beneath it. Close enough that they became desperate. Silence filled the library. The fire crackled softly nearby. Outside, snow drifted past the windows. Finally, Evelyn folded the letter and looked toward the photograph again. For the first time in years, her memories felt uncertain. Not because she had forgotten them, because she had misunderstood them. Suddenly the library door opened. An advisor entered, his expression unusually tense. Your Majesty, he said. The summit delegates have arrived early. Damon nodded. Any issues? The advisor hesitated. One of them requested a private audience immediately. Something in the man's tone caused both Damon and Evelyn to exchange a glance. The advisor swallowed. He claims to have proof regarding the organization behind the symbol. The room fell silent. Evelyn's heart began to race. After weeks of clues and questions, someone was finally willing to speak openly. But deep down, she could not shake a growing sense of unease. Because if the truth was finally coming into the light, then whoever had spent years hiding it would not remain silent for long. The summit began beneath clear winter skies. Representatives from every major territory filled the great hall of Blackthorn Keep. Long tables stretched across polished stone floors. Banners from rival regions hung side by side for the first time in years. Outside, crowds gathered in the streets hoping to witness the beginning of a new era. Inside, tension lingered beneath every smile. Evelyn sat beside Damon at the center table. Only weeks earlier, she would have given anything to avoid sitting beside him. Now she found herself watching the room through the same lens he did, searching for signs of hidden motives and unanswered questions. The delegate who claimed to possess evidence arrived shortly before the formal proceedings began. He was older than Evelyn expected, with silver hair and tired eyes. When he stepped forward, the hall fell silent. Carefully, he placed a collection of documents onto the central table. The records revealed years of secret communications between influential figures across multiple territories. Business agreements tied to conflict. Political alliances strengthened by division. Coordinated efforts to undermine negotiations whenever peace became possible. Most importantly, every document carried the same symbol Evelyn had been chasing since her arrival. Murmurs spread through the hall. Faces paled. Some delegates looked shocked. Others looked nervous. A few looked frightened. As more evidence emerged, the pattern became impossible to deny. The organization had spent years keeping old wounds open because stability threatened their power. Suddenly, many of the tragedies that had shaped recent history began to make sense. Evelyn's heart pounded as she turned another page. Then she froze. Tucked among the records was a final letter written in her brother's hand. The hall disappeared around her as she read. In the letter, he described his determination to expose the network. He wrote about his partnership with Damon. He wrote about his hope that future generations would inherit peace instead of suspicion. Near the end, one sentence stood alone. If anything happens to me, tell Evelyn that hatred is the easiest story to believe and often the hardest one to let go. Tears blurred her vision. For years she had carried anger because it felt simpler than uncertainty, simpler than grief, simpler than asking difficult questions. Slowly, she folded the letter and looked toward Damon. He met her gaze without speaking. He did not need to. The truth had finally spoken for itself. Hours later, after the evidence had been reviewed and the agreements formally approved, the leaders of the territories gathered before the people waiting outside. Snow sparkled across rooftops beneath the afternoon sun. Thousands watched from the streets below. Damon stepped forward first. Then, to the surprise of everyone present, Evelyn joined him. She looked across the crowd and thought about the journey that had brought her there. She had arrived believing she was marrying the enemy. She had arrived convinced she understood the past. Instead, she had discovered courage where she expected cruelty, loyalty where she expected betrayal, and hope where she expected disappointment. Reaching for Damon's hand, she held it firmly before the assembled kingdoms. The crowd erupted into cheers that echoed across the valley. In that moment, peace was no longer an idea written on paper. It was real. It was alive. And as Evelyn stood beside the man she once blamed for everything, she finally understood something her brother had known long ago. The future is built not by those who cling to old fears, but by those willing to trust again.